Hi all, welcome to Public Cloud Design Tips and Tricks again. Today's topic is a high-level overview of Azure connectivity. The problem statement is how Azure services can be connected from different consumers in different scenarios. Now, what is a network connection? A network connection is a communication from one service to another service. It can be a system-to-system communication, or it can be an user-to-system communication. Now, that communication usually happens within a homogeneous or across a heterogeneous environment. So, what is a homogeneous environment? Homogeneous environment is that network boundary where a specific set of IPs are assigned to specific set of users or a specific organizations. Whereas heterogeneous network topology is a combination of a private network boundary with a public cloud network boundary either or across two different data centers. So that is more a heterogeneous network topology. Now in public cloud, this kind of topology works either within the cloud network boundary or across the cloud. That means one cloud to other cloud or from a cloud to a private data center. So that is how it works. A network connectivity can be of two types, public and private. A simple example where service A is deployed in a non-cloud environment, service B and service C are deployed in a cloud environment. Now the service A can run within a public network or within a private network in that non-cloud domain, and service B and service C can also be run within the public zone of the public cloud or the private zone of the public cloud, and there is a communication happens across in this kind of a heterogeneous environment, service A to service B and service B to service C or service A to service C. So that is how it works in a very high level example. Now, what is a hybrid connection? A hybrid connection is a communication from one data center to other data center. The other data center can be either a private data center or a public cloud data center. Now, the communication always happens using a dedicated network connectivity from one data center to other data center. Sometimes it may also require that one data center connects to different data center using a public internet route in few cases. Now, what is a typical connectivity looks like in a public cloud environment? So if you go to the diagram, it's a public cloud environment, and within that public cloud environment there is a cloud network scope, and within that network and there are few services like IaaS services or PaaS services are running, and they are also interacting with other network outside the cloud boundary. For example, service A and service B. Okay, so if you see the communication, it can happen even within the cloud or outside the cloud. So that is how a typical connectivity looks like. Now, it can be within the public zone or across public and private zone. What it means, the public zone is more open to the audience within the public cloud, and the private zone is more dedicated set of IPs which is controlled to a specific set of user we have already discussed. So that is how it works within the cloud. Here zone means dedicated network boundary, and a private zone can be owned by an organization that I have already explained. Now, how a connectivity patterns usually looks like within Azure. So there are three building blocks here, network building blocks. The below one is the private data center, the middle one is the Azure public cloud, and the top one is internet public network or a third party network. Now within the Azure network boundary, there are two blocks. One is Azure public network and Azure private network, which is more dedicated to the dedicated to a set of people or a setup or an organization. Now within that private area, you can have your network pattern, like if you're working with IaaS services can be IaaS network, or if you're working with PaaS services can be a PaaS network, and that in turn talk to the managed services of Azure or the PaaS services of Azure within the public area of the Azure data center. Now there are different scenarios or different case within that kind of a topology. So case one is more the same connectivity. If you see, The below one is the private network, the organization dedicated network, where the services or the networks are connecting to many services of Azure data centers using a firewall appliances. So what it means, the service URL or the port or the dedicated port which is required to connect to a managed service within Azure data center should be whitelisted in the Azure firewall as a rule, and the communication always happens from the private zone to the firewall, and firewall reroute the request to the specific Azure managed services. So that is one kind of a pattern. Now coming to the second scenario or case 2, the same connectivity uh, from a private network within public cloud, Azure public cloud to Azure PaaS services happens through a service endpoint. What is a service endpoint? A service endpoint provides a direct connectivity to Azure services by using Azure backbone network. So what it does, it enables the private IP address of a virtual network or the private network to reach to an endpoint of Azure managed services, okay, without mentioning the public IP of the managed services. So it always use a service tag to identify what kind of services the private network wants to use actually. So that is how it works. Now the same connectivity, if you want to secure it more, then there is another options called private endpoint that can be used. What is a private endpoint? A private endpoint is a network interface or a network interface card that uses a private IP address from the virtual network actually, or the IP sets assigned to the private virtual network. Okay, so how it works? The private endpoint using the private link endpoint, it tries to connect to the managed services of Azure. So in a way, it's a direct peering between a private network to the Azure dedicated network for the managed services. So the benefit of it is it's totally private in nature, and it tries to bring the managed services by assigning a private IP to it. So so the major difference between a service endpoint and private endpoint is, in service endpoint it's a kind of one-to-many relationship. What it means is a private IP within your Azure network talks to an endpoint of managed service where you can have any available IPs of that managed network. Whereas in the private endpoint, it is more a private IP to IP connection. Okay, so a dedicated service assigned for this private IP. So that is how it works. Now the fourth scenario is more a hybrid scenario here, where you want to connect from your own data center to public cloud, or you want to extend your data centers to Microsoft Azure public cloud. So that is where uh, this kind of pattern comes into picture, and this pattern is achievable by using express route, which is a service from Azure again, and that enables or extends your private data center to Azure public cloud. Now if you see the flow diagram, the leftmost part is customer network, which use a private provider edge. What is a provider edge? It provides by a network service provider. It's more a dedicated connections provided by a provider, and that uses the express route circuit to connect to either Azure PaaS managed area or Azure private area. So that is how it works. So express route brings on-premise networks into Microsoft Cloud over a private connection with the help of a connectivity provider. Now, if you want to know more about it, there are always different references from Microsoft, and you can go deep dive into it. So that's it for the day. Thank you and have a good day.